see the Mardi Gras. Yes, I'm gonna jolly. I wanna see the Mardi Gras. When I see the Mardi Gras, I wanna know what's carnival for. Going down in New Orleans, I've got my ticket in my hand. Going down in New Orleans, I've got my ticket in my hand. When I get to New Orleans, I wanna see the Zulu King. Down in New Orleans, down on the railroad into me. Yes, down in New Orleans, on railroad into me. Gonna make it my standing place until I see the Zulu Queen.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. The date is Friday, July 3rd, 2026. The time is 12:33 p.m. I would like to welcome you to the EIS Media Group Lecture Series. And we have a phenomenal lecture ready for you today, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of today's lecture is the President Gerald Ford and Vice President Nelson Rockefeller Commission hearings, accountability and investigation. And I'll have you know, ladies and gentlemen, that I tend to do these lectures outdoors. So I may have to raise or project my voice ever so often in order to drown out the background noise. Thank you for listening, and thank you for viewing, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, you will have noticed that over the past month, approximately, I have done lectures that correspond to Senate and congressional hearings that were had in the United States, in Washington, concerning the covert activities of intelligence agencies. Okay, agencies that gather data, intel, and information about the socio-political events and atmosphere that is present in the United States and in elsewhere. And this data is processed by various intelligence agencies, including the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Administration, and the U.S. Armed Forces. And that material is aggregated and condensed into ideas and concepts that elected officials, federal, state, and local law enforcers, the tech community, and the American people can use in their daily lives to make the trajectory of their lives more effective. But, ladies and gentlemen, what we're here to talk about is we're here to talk about the perception of these intelligence agencies having stepped over their constitutional boundaries and into the lives of American people in such a way that was harmful to some of them, it was intrusive to some of them, it was disruptive to some of them, and it was fatal to some of them, all in the name of the aggregation of data, information. And these intelligence agencies used every resource at their disposal to gather as much data about human behavior and human physiology as they possibly could, even at the expense of the life, the health, and the privacy of a lot of Americans, ladies and gentlemen, and oftentimes equate these abuses to clandestine gang stalking, which is derivative of some of the programs we're going to talk about here today, ladies and gentlemen. MK Ultra, for example, a human behavior experimentation protocol, one that saw the CIA and the U.S. Army in particular use chemical and biological agents on U.S. citizens, many of which had no idea what was being done to them, and the health effects ranged from mild to severe, depending on what was used and how much of it, you see. And it wasn't just that, ladies and gentlemen. There was quite a bit of spying, quite a bit of intrusion into people's mail by the CIA, intrusions into people's telephone calls at home and abroad, intrusions into telegrams that were being sent between U.S. citizens and international locations. There were a ton of questionable judgments that were made by these intelligence activities, by these intelligence organizations, particularly in the 60s and 70s. And some of these intelligence activities included assassinations. The CIA tried numerous times to assassinate Fidel Castro and failed. It succeeded in assassinating, or rather causing the death of Chile's head of state, Allende, in the 1970s. And there were a number of persons in Iraq and in Central Africa that the CIA had interest in assassinating as well. Sometimes the CIA assassinated their target successfully, and sometimes they did not. Okay, Fidel Castro, who was the president of Cuba for at least 45 years, one of his closest advisors asserted that the CIA attempted to assassinate Fidel Castro 850 times over a 25-year period and failed. All right, and it was also rumored that the CIA attempted to assassinate Raul Castro a number of times as well and failed. And the frequency that the CIA put together these assassination campaigns against foreign leaders was talked about in a number of senatorial and congressional hearings, particularly in the Frank Church hearings and in the Senator Otis Pike hearings, which you can find on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Just look up the EIS Media Group lecture series, or you can Google my name, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith. I put up 2 lengthy, very informative lectures on the Senator Frank Church hearings and the Congressman Otis Pike hearings. And you're more than welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to read those hearings, which have similar themes to the hearings we're going to talk about today. Ladies and gentlemen, President Gerald Ford and Vice President Nelson A. Rockefeller, along with a number of other politicians that were close to the president, started having concerns about CIA activities, in particular here in the U.S. They put together this commission. It was basically a closed-door executive level hearing in which a number of witnesses were called to this hearing, which was closed-door sessions. And questions were asked them about CIA activities. Now, a number of these witnesses that were called, like, for example, the CIA Director William Colby, he testified in all 3 in-depth intelligence activity hearings. Director Colby, he testified in the Frank Church Committee hearings. He testified in the Otis Pike hearings. And he's testifying a 3rd time here in the Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, which is a report to the president. And these hearings were closed-door sessions, but the content of these hearings were recorded at the time and were later declassified and made available for public use. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get right into the main talking points today. We have AI modules. We have fundamental issues. We have the JFK saga. We have improper activities investigations. We have mail tampering investigations. Project Mockingbird. We have the Frank Olson story. And we have a summary of the charges and findings as having been made by the report to the president by the Commission on CIA Activities within the United States. The chairman of this commission was Vice President Nelson A. Rockefeller, and there were a number of other persons present as witnesses and staff members to these hearings. You got John T. Connor, Lyman L. Lemnitzer, and what I'll do is we'll get into their actual roles here in a second. All right, so John T. Connor was the former Secretary of Commerce. C. Douglas Dillon was present. All of these persons were present during these hearings. Former Secretary of the Treasury, Ed Irwin N. Griswold, former Solicitor General. Lane Kirkland was the Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. You had General Lyman L. Lemnitzer, the former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You have you have Ronald Reagan, the former Governor of California, who would go on to become president about 6 to 8 years later. And you have Edgar F. Shannon Jr., former president of the University of Virginia. And they assisted the commissioners in conducting the investigation. The panel appointed David W. Berlin a former staff member of the Warren Commission as the executive director. The primary task of the commission was to investigate allegations that the CIA had exceeded its statutory authority by conducting illegal domestic operations against anti-war activists and dissidents. The full findings and records of their investigation can be accessed via the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library or the National Archives. So this was a very high-level, closed-door executive meeting, ladies and gentlemen. The U.S. President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States. And this particular hearing was one of consequence. All right, it was held during the month of June 1975. And ladies and gentlemen, in order to understand the totality of what's at stake with respect to the issues that are being presented here, you must look at the full history of such programs. You must look at the full history of these commissions, of these hearings that are both of a highly consequential and very important nature. I mean, these are historical matters here that affect the lives of all Americans. You see? What we have, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to look at chapter 1 of what is essentially a document that is it's part of the summary of the hearings. You see, the hearings themselves, closed door, executive level, summaries and outlines of this hearing were made public at some point, and the majority of which we will read from today, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to read summaries and outlines as having been furnished by the President's Commission after the hearings were over. These outlines and summaries were made public by the President's office. So chapter 1 here, we have the fundamental issues. In announcing the formation of this commission, the President noted that an effective intelligence and counterintelligence capability is essential to provide the safeguards that protect our national interests and help avert armed conflicts. While it is vital that security requirements be met, the President continued it is equally important that intelligence activities be conducted without impairing our domestic institutions and fundamental freedoms. The Commission's assessment of the CIA's activities within the United States reflects the members' deep concern for both individual rights and national security. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do is there are 4 bullet points here. You have individual rights, the government must obey the law. You have national security and resolving the issues. What I'm going to do is paraphrase each section here rather than read it line for line, because quite frankly, that method on issues that are fairly easily condensed is going to be tedious. So for individual rights, the paragraph begins by, and mind you, these are the words of, these are the sentiments of the President of the United States itself that have been summarized and condensed by staff members of this commission. So with respect to individual rights, the Bill of Rights is spoken of. Okay, the Bill of Rights is it's an auxiliary and an appendage to the U.S. Constitution that guarantees basic rights and freedoms for all Americans. And there are individual liberties that are stated in the Constitution that are explicitly stated for the purpose of protecting people from government overreach. Now, of course, people want to be protected by their government in any way, and they want to take advantage of any resources that their government can offer them in exchange for their tax dollars. But there's a reasonable expectation of the observation of the law from government to citizen, and a reasonable expectation of privacy and the respect of their constitutional rights and liberties from citizen to government. So there's a reciprocal relationship there, and that reciprocity is what drives the relationship between governments and people. The Fourth Amendment is stated, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So the Fourth Amendment guarantees the American people a basic right against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's basically unreasonable privacy violations by the federal, state, and local governments that exist here in the United States. And ultimately, intrusive investigations against Americans must have a sufficient basis to warrant the invasion. There has to be a specific reason and a compelling reason for the government to intrude upon the privacy of its citizens. And if such an intrusion must be made, there has to be a reasonable expectation of how prevalent this intrusion is to be. And also, there are certain exceptions which are not sharply defined. These conditions must be met, especially for significant investigative intrusions. So there's kind of a tier. Okay, are you just listening in to, or is the CIA, FBI, NSA, the U.S. Armed Services, are there intelligence bodies? Are they just listening to phone calls? Are they just intercepting telegrams? Are they just opening and reading your mail before you get it? Okay, are they listening to your phone calls at work? Are your phones tapped? That kind of thing, ladies and gentlemen. Have your neighbors been deputized to watch you? Or is there something even more intrusive happening? Have they set up surveillance equipment in your home? That type of thing. Okay, these questions have to be answered, and the degree by which your government intrudes into your privacy must be met by a reasonable expectation of the urgency that's at hand. Part B, the government must obey the law. Individual liberties of American citizens are certainly dependent on government observance of the law. The law does not just apply to human being people. It applies to companies, organizations, entities, businesses, corporations, and it applies to federal, state, and local governments. Okay, whoever is at the helm of these entities, whoever is representing these entities, they are bound by laws. They are bound by mandates. They are bound by statutes, ordinances, policies, and guidelines that are developed to make the entity run as smoothly as possible, to be as profitable as possible, to be as effective as possible, to benefit society as much as possible, and cause as little harm or damage to the society that they operate in as possible. That's what laws are about. They're about increasing efficiency and minimizing inefficiencies. And governments must obey the law as well, otherwise they could face congressional actions. And when we say governments, we're talking federal, state, and local governments and their auxiliaries. They must all obey the law or face penalties, particularly at the federal level, some of which we've seen in the Otis Pike and Senator Frank Church hearings. See, national security. Individual liberties also depend on maintaining public order at home and in protecting the country against infiltration from abroad and an armed attack. ensuring domestic tranquility, and providing for a common defense are not only constitutional goals, but necessary preconditions for a free democratic system. So essentially what they're saying here is they're saying that, yeah, national security is a part of the freedoms discussion. It's not just about government overreach. And at times you may run into a situation as a country where the country is threatened internally or externally, and it needs to take certain measures that may include the occasional infringing on the constitutional rights of its citizens in order to neutralize the threat. Now, a lot of times those types of situations are very vaguely defined, and during times of national security uncertainty, your intelligence agencies go far beyond and vastly past what is reasonable or what is necessary, particularly in the lives of people who may not pose a threat to society. And quite frankly, I think when targeted individuals, persons who have been placed in gang stalking campaigns, realize that they're in a gang stalking campaign, and it doesn't take much to realize that. It's very easy to see, typically. And plus, the way gang stalking is set up, the target is meant to know that they're in a gang stalking campaign. It's not something that's hidden from them. It's something that is shown to them on a regular basis, presented to them on a regular basis, in multiple places by multiple parties, multiple times a day, in a way that's oftentimes flamboyant, outrageous, and very explicit. Okay? When a targeted person starts experiencing this and it actually starts affecting the standard of living that they have, or the quality of their life, they usually start wondering what branch of government this is, because quite frankly, there are no private companies or no citizen organizations that have the ability, the resources, the financial equity, and the strategic resources to put together something this vast, something that is nationwide, something that is sophisticated, something that has the ability to penetrate even courtrooms and government operations with its signaling mechanism. Okay, it has got to be governmental, it's got to be intelligence, and it's got to be armed services. Those are the only auxiliaries, those are the only answers to this problem. Okay, everyday people aren't sitting around putting together gang stalking campaigns and executing them. Absolutely not. It takes military, industrial grade strategic capabilities to do this stuff. Okay, it takes military grade espionage units and equipment to do this stuff. Okay, this is a highly technical, highly organized, well-resourced, very mobile disruption, harassment, and germ spreading campaign that has to have roots in governmental workings. Anything else just doesn't make sense. And if gang stalking is being done in the interest of national security, that needs to be made known to the American people if this country is to continue calling itself a constitutional republic or a democracy. Section D, resolving the issues. Individual freedoms and privacy are fundamental in our society. Constitutional governments must be maintained, and effective and efficient intelligence systems are necessary, and to be effective, many of its activities conducted in secrecy. So satisfying the objectives that are made present present considerable opportunities for conflict. The vigorous pursuit of intelligence, that's data gathering, by certain methods, can lead to invasions of individual rights. The preservation of the United States requires an effective intelligence capacity, but the preservation of individual liberties in the United States requires limitations on restricting and gathering intelligence. The drawing of reasonable lines where legitimate intelligence needs and end erosion of constitutional government begins is difficult. In seeking to draw such lines, we have been guided in the first instance by the commands of the Constitution, as they have been interpreted by the Supreme Court, the laws as written by Congress, the values we believe are reflected in the democratic process, and the faith we have in a free society. So basically, what's happening in Part D is we're seeing where the president is saying, look, all right, when it comes to national security, when it comes to intelligence gathering, rigorous intelligence gathering has the ability, it has the capacity, it has the inclination as government activity to intrude into the lives of citizens if that must happen in the scope or in the trajectory of any of our intelligence agencies gathering intelligence about what's happening in the homeland, socially, culturally, legally, economically. These things are being gathered. These elements of societal life are being gathered by government agencies. If intrusions are necessary, there should be a reasonable line drawn by the federal government as to what those intrusions are, what the pros and cons of the intrusion are, and whether the intrusion is truly necessary in that particular case. So there's quite a bit, ladies and gentlemen, of insight there from the office of the president. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to the JFK saga, the John F. Kennedy Jr. saga. We had a president of the United States in John F. Kennedy Jr. who was assassinated 10 or so years later after President Kennedy's assassination. There were rumors in the American societal function and in the American intelligence community that the CIA set that assassination up. Now, these were suspicions that were held in the intelligence community and in society, and I think that the office of the president, in evaluating these claims and doing a subsection of this hearing specifically on JFK's assassination and the investigation that followed, I think this was a way of either proving or disproving those accusations. So we're going to read some about the allegations concerning the assassination of President Kennedy. And just give me 1 second, please, ladies and gentlemen. These documents that I'm reading from in this section, as with the previous section on the fundamental insights into these matters, is from the U.S. President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States files. They were published in 1975, and they are federal records. These records are 82,000 pages long, and it is materials related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy or to anti-Castro activities, and have been processed for research. And these works, these documents that I'm reading from on the U.S. President's Commission on CIA Activities, were prepared by U.S. government employees as a part of their official duties, and they are in the public domain. In addition, President Ford has donated to the U.S. his copyright interest in any other of his writings that may be included in this collection. So these documents are held presently in the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum. Its library, located at 1000 Beale Avenue, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 48109. And the museum, the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum, is located at 303 Pearl Street, Northwest Grand Rapids, Michigan, 49504. and can be accessed at www.fordlibrarymuseum.gov. So these Rockefeller reports, these Rockefeller Commission reports, are held and offered to the general public by the President Gerald R. Ford Library and the President Gerald R. Ford Museum. And that's where these documents originated. But we're going to read an AI module on President John F. Kennedy before we get into official documents. On November 22nd, 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed while riding in an open-top motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. The fatal shots were fired from a nearby building by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was later killed before standing trial. The seminal facts and the details of the tragedy include the timeline at 12:30 Central Standard Time, 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Gunshots rang out as the motorcade passed the Texas School Book Depository, and President Kennedy was struck in the neck and head. Texas Governor John Connally was also seriously wounded but survived. The president was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. The aftermath. Following the shooting, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took the oath of office aboard the Air Force One at 2:38 p.m. The perpetrator, Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine and Marxist, was arrested shortly after the shooting while evading police. He fatally shot Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett. 2 days later, on November 24th, Oswald was murdered by a local nightclub owner, Jack Ruby, while being transferred to the county jail. And that murder was caught on camera, ladies and gentlemen. So basically, that gives the basics of John F. Kennedy's assassination. He was in an open-top motorcade. There was some sort of a celebratory event happening, and this guy Lee Harvey Oswald was waiting on this opportunity, and he was standing in a nearby building and aimed a rifle out the window and shot the president twice, once in the neck and once in his forehead, killing him. The investigations were that the Federal Warren Commission, appointed by President Johnson, concluded that Oswald acted alone. However, the U.S. House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded in 1979 that Kennedy was likely killed as a result of conspiracy, though they did not identify conspirators. Declassified records include due to enduring public debate and legislative pushes. The U.S. government has released thousands of pages of previously classified files concerning the assassination, including major document dumps through CNN and the National Archives. That's to exonerate the CIA, ladies and gentlemen. There was a lot of speculation that the CIA set this up. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me, personally. Okay, the CIA did carry out assassinations of presidents overseas. Okay, and there were various countries in South America, in Africa, in the Middle East, that the CIA did orchestrate assassinations of sitting leaders of foreign countries, okay, to achieve its objectives in what it might have referred to as attaining stability in the region or opening up more plausible lines of communication between the U.S. and foreign countries, that type of thing. But for the CIA to orchestrate the murder of a sitting U.S. president, that just doesn't make any sense to me personally, as a researcher, as a man that looks into these things. Okay, from political standpoints, from historical standpoints, it just doesn't make sense. Okay, the director of the CIA is appointed by the president of the United States. Why would the CIA move to assassinate the man that appointed its director? It just doesn't make sense, but that was a persistent rumor, and these matters were looked into during these closed-door hearings by the stated executives that I mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture. Those very executives came to these hearings with their staff members, and they analyzed accusations, they analyzed documents, they analyzed rebuttals, they analyzed evidence, they analyzed testimony, they analyzed a lot of things. And they had actual hearings, one of which was Director Colby, who had already testified in public about a lot of what's being talked about, but there were some things that Director Colby was not about to talk about in public, even in congressional hearings with Mr. Pike or senatorial hearings with Mr. Church. There were certain matters, particularly the ones regarding the CIA's role in overseas assassinations, that Mr. Colby wanted to talk about in person, in closed door sessions. And these closed door sessions, okay, the Gerald R. Ford and Nelson Rockefeller Commission meetings, these closed door executive level sessions gave Director Colby and some other people in the CIA and other intelligence agencies the opportunity to speak and testify in a closed door session, as opposed to under the bright lights of a televised Senate hearing or a televised congressional hearing. So we're going to look at some of what was talked about here. We're going to do a summarization of these documents, and this is Chapter 19 of the expose. And mind you, this expose is held in the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum. It's basically a summary of each concern that came before this executive committee. And Chapter 19 of these, the hearing itself, okay, the summary of its business, right, were divided into chapters. Every chapter of this summary addresses a specific matter, and these summaries were based upon the core matter at hand, the conversations had in the committee, the documentation presented, the evidence presented, the rebuttals presented, and the conclusions of the matter. They were all documented into chapters depending on the topic, and they were all compiled in a document that is publicly available now, and that document was curated and put together by some of the staff members of the U.S. government's printing capacity. So Chapter 19 is concerning the assassination of President Kennedy. There are allegations that the CIA participated in the assassination. And two theories have prevailed. One is that E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis committed the murder on behalf of the CIA. The other is that the CIA had connections with Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby, and that those connections somehow led to the assassination. Now keep in mind, Lee Harvey Oswald is the man that is widely believed to have actually murdered President Kennedy, and Jack Ruby is the one who murdered Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, some people believe that Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby were both CIA operatives, and that the CIA sort of commissioned or persuaded Jack Ruby to kill Lee Harvey Oswald in retaliation for the murder of President Kennedy. Now, these two other guys, Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt, they were looked at as possible conspirators. as well. However, those theories did not hold up. Now, E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis were both convicted of burglarizing the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate scandal of 1972. Were CIA agents or employees at the time of the assassination of the president in 1963. It is further alleged that they were together in Dallas on the day of the assassination, and that shortly after the assassination they were found in a railroad boxcar situated behind the grassy knoll, an area located to the right front of the presidential car at the time of the assassination. Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase now. Okay, so these two guys, E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, they were convicted of burglarizing the DNC during the Watergate scandal. That was a scandal where it was found that there were certain Republican factions in the United States that were very close to the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, that burglarized the DNC headquarters at the Watergate building in 1972, and they were basically looking for sensitive documents that they could use against the Democratic challenger for president in order to secure President Nixon's chances of victory in the next election. However, that failed, and the entire scandal made President Nixon look awful. Okay, and that's all people really remember him for now. So basically, these two guys were looked at as being possible conspirators, and it was basically after the investigations were completed, it was found that these two guys were not conspirators. Yeah, they were two knuckleheads, okay, that burglarized the DNC, but they were not conspirators in the assassination of JFK. Now, E. Howard Hunt was an employee of the CIA, and he had been an employee of the CIA for many years, which it begs a suspension of disbelief to know that a CIA employee would burglarize the Democratic National Convention, trying to find incriminating documents on the Democratic challenger for president. It boggles the mind, and it's a knuckleheaded thing to do. But that guy that broke into the DNC was actually a CIA agent. And he had been one for many years. So the Watergate burglary was perpetrated by a CIA agent. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time, because sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, when you're talking about something like clandestine gang stalking being a government op, you forget that we've seen similar covert mess-ups in this country before. We've seen MK Ultra, we've seen COINTELPRO, we've seen Operation Hoodwink, Operation Chaos as well. Okay, we've seen Operation Sea Spray and all of those horrible operations that the intelligence community in this country has implemented in the past. Okay, and you know, I think that our intelligence community has not learned from history in the way that it should have. And there's a lot of history to pull from. And I hope the intelligence community in this country can look through my lectures and find some historical insight and context as to why these kinds of programs should not be implemented in American society, especially in a way that's hazardous or disruptive. If you need to carry out clandestine operations, do it in a way that's respectable, safe, and constitutional. Otherwise, guys like me are going to get on the internet, and we're going to put all the business out there for the whole world to see. And it's going to make everybody look bad. So the guy that broke into the Watergate building to burglarize Democratic National Convention materials was a CIA agent. His name was Mr. Sturgis. And Hunt and Sturgis were allegedly in Dallas. However, that is not accurate based on the investigation. Now, keep in mind, this is not an exoneration of Hunt and Sturgis. They both were CIA employees, and they both burglarized the 1972 Democratic National Convention offices. They both did that. That's something they were convicted for. But despite that burglary that they were convicted of, and despite their CIA affiliations, they did not assassinate the president. Okay, they were not even in Dallas at the time. So that was something that that is something that needs to be made known. Now, E. Edward Hunt was an employee of the CIA. Frank Sturgis, there's no evidence that links him to the CIA. I highly doubt that he was not affiliated with the CIA. I think the CIA wiped his record to avoid a scandal. But I believe Frank Sturgis was a CIA operative himself, okay? E. Howard Hunt was definitely a CIA agent. Frank Sturgis, possibly a CIA agent. Both burgled the 1972 Democratic National Convention in the Watergate building, looking for incriminating documents against a Democratic challenger for president. Both were convicted. Both were suspected of having something to do with the murder of John F. Kennedy, but neither was actually in Dallas on the day of the murder. E. Howard Hunt was in Washington, D.C., apparently. And Frank Sturgis was in Miami. So Hunt was in Washington, D.C. during the day of the murder. Sturgis was in Miami during the day of the murder. So these two guys were not involved with that murder. That was a Lee Harvey Oswald murder. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the that's pretty much the long and short of it. I mean, there was another allegation that these two guys were hiding out in a boxcar somewhere in Dallas, Texas, and they took a train to near where the site of the political event would be, and that they both hopped off of this train disguised as homeless people, or what you might refer to as hobos, and then took rifles to the motorcade and shot and killed President Kennedy together with Lee Harvey Oswald. A very outlandish theory, and that was proven to be false, ladies and gentlemen. So there's all kinds of theories out there, but this was just sort of a way of clearing the air with respect to CIA involvement, because one of the burglars to the DNC in 1972 was a CIA agent. Okay, E. Howard Hunt. So there was some speculation that he had been assassinated by a CIA agent, because it was a CIA agent that broke into the DNC in 1972. But as it turns out, both men were not present on the day of, and Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't a CIA agent. So that exonerates the CIA from participation in this. The CIA did not participate in the murder of President John F. Kennedy. That was the conclusion of that. And that came up during these hearings. It was an important issue. And I know that the CIA was glad that it was exonerated. All right, Chapter 14, involvement of the CIA in improper activities for the White House. During 1971, the CIA, at the request of members of the White House staff, provided alias documents and disguised materials, a tape recorder, camera, film, and film processing to E. Howard Hunt. It also complied with a request to prepare a psychological profile of Daniel Ellsberg. This assistance was requested by various members of the White House staff, and some of the materials provided later used in connection with improper activities, including the break-in to the office of Dr. Lewis Fielding, Ellsberg's psychiatrist. President Nixon and his staff also insisted in this period that the CIA turn over to the president highly classified files relating to the Lebanon landings, the Bay of Pigs, which was a Cuban invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War. The request was made on stated grounds that those files were needed by the president in the performance of his duties, but in fact were made to serve the president's personal political ends. So I'll stop there. Basically, these there were a number of documents and materials that were of a highly classified nature that President Nixon asked the CIA for. These documents were not turned over to President Nixon with the intention that they'd help him perform his presidential duties. He was looking to sift through these documents to assist him in gaining an edge politically. Okay? And that's a big no-no. All right? With respect to highly classified documents, if they are requested by the president, he can obtain them. But there has to be a legal and lawful reason for him sifting through those documents. Otherwise, it's outside of the bounds of the law. So President Nixon was in violation there. He had no business with those classified activities documents, and that's what the commission concluded. The commission also exonerated the CIA from advance knowledge of the Fielding or Watergate break-ins. They're saying that E. Howard Hunt acted alone and without CIA involvement. That was what the commission concluded. But it's hard to say. I mean, I'm glad that the CIA was not seen as being capable of organizing break-ins, but the CIA was more than capable of organizing break-ins. And you know what? I hate to be so pessimistic, but for me, I don't think the CIA didn't know. I just don't think they documented it as a part of any operation. So we're going to scroll down a little bit. We're going to go down to Section A, Employment of E. Howard Hunt by Robert R. Mullen and Company. In April of 1970, E. Howard Hunt retired from the CIA after having served in it for 20 years. So he was a veteran. He was a veteran CIA agent, the guy that broke into the DNC. Hunt, while employed by Mullen, orchestrated and led the Fielding and Watergate break-ins. And these circumstances have led to suspicions of the CIA being involved in such thuggery. Here it gives some background information into Hunt's CIA career. He supervised a group of Cubans, forming a government in exile in connection with the Bay of Pigs operation, and subsequently was responsible for certain foreign publishing activities conducted undercover by the agency. Mind you, the Bay of Pigs was a CIA operation that sought to topple the Cuban government, possibly with the intention of installing a CIA-backed government, as it had done in a number of other countries in South America, but failed. And it also says that after he retired, Hunt contacted the agency's External Employment Assistant Branch, which assists retired CIA operatives in finding employment after they retired. So even after he retired, E. Howard Hunt was still in sort of an unofficial CIA affiliate. So let's scroll down a little bit. He got a security clearance in October 1970, which increased this man's ability to operate as an insider, as a CIA insider, and had access to covert details that the CIA was working on. That's on page 175. So we're going to look at, now what we're doing is I have a few critical points marked here, and all right. What we're going to do is we're going to move over. We're going to talk some about Operation Chaos, because this Hunt matter is by and large concluded. There were some other details concerning a man by the name of Robert R. Mullen, who hired E. Howard Hunt in an executive capacity in his business, which, in the grand scheme of things, is not terribly important to the matter at hand. So I'm going to skip that part, and we're going to look at Operation Chaos. This was something that took place it began in August of 1967, and Operation Chaos was basically a way for President Lyndon B. Johnson, who served before President Richard Nixon, to found a National Commission on Civil Disorders, because in the 1960s, America was racially chaotic. And in August of 1967, Thomas Karamessinis, Deputy Director for Plans, issued a directive to the Chief of the Counterintelligence Staff, instructing him to establish an operation for overseas coverage of subversive student activities. So essentially, Operation Chaos was a way of surveilling subversive or chaotic student groups at universities across the country that were participating in pro-communist or anti-American activities. And there was a lot of domestic surveillance that happened. There were a lot of taps that were placed on a lot of these college students' phones. There were a lot of operatives that the CIA sent to infiltrate these on-campus student dissident groups. And the dissident groups were about the Vietnam War, women's rights, some of these dissident groups were about racial rights. So there were a lot of student groups that were forming all across the country, some of which were sympathetic to the left wing, the far left wing of political ideology, that the CIA saw it fit to investigate for subversive activities to the U.S., and unprecedented surveillance means were used to monitor these student groups, and some intrusions, constitutional intrusions, were found. So the CIA and the FBI, to a lesser degree, were involved in Operation Chaos. And one of the objectives of the CIA was to find out if there were any foreign governments that were involved in Operation Chaos, any foreign communist countries. The CIA and the FBI at this particular time in history were very anxious about communist or what you might refer to as far left governments involving themselves in American affairs. There was even at one point in time the FBI showing real suspicion that the civil rights movement in the United States, the desegregation movement, the police brutality movement, that whole movement was being encouraged and financed by communist countries. Particularly Russia and China were the ones that were suspected. Although I, in my time doing research on this matter, have not found any evidence that Russia or China were involved in the American civil rights movement. Those were local movements, and the people that were in those movements were not beholden to, paid by, or financed by Russia or China. So that's a matter of public record at this point, but we're still in the Cold War era, and the U.S. was very suspicious of communist countries, Russia, China, Vietnam, and North Korea in particular, as potential agitators in the U.S. And in Vietnam. So, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, it just goes to show. I mean, the communist countries, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Vietnam, they were all very skeptical of the U.S. Okay, you can throw Cuba in that mix too. They were all very skeptical of the U.S., and the U.S. was very skeptical of them, particularly with respect to the collection of sensitive or classified information. The U.S. thought they were being spied on by the communists. The communists thought they were being spied on by the U.S. And the U.S., particularly its CIA and FBI, did extensive surveillance protocols on its college campuses to gather data on college activities. Okay, anti-war protests, civil rights protests, women's rights protests. There were a lot of things that students in these various groups were seen as having participated in. All right, so next we're going to look at mail tampering. This is going to be on page 21 of this packet. The CIA's mail intercepts. We're going to read the findings and we're going to read the conclusions of the CIA's ability to intercept mail. At the time the CIA came into being, one of the highest national intelligence priorities was to gain an understanding of the Soviet Union and its worldwide activities affecting national security. In this context, the CIA began in 1952 a program of surveying mail between the U.S. and the Soviet Union as it passed through a New York postal facility. In 1953, it began opening some of this mail. The program was expanded over the following 2 decades and ultimately involved the opening of many letters and the analysis of envelopes or covers of a great many more letters. And we're going to skip down to the next paragraph. The Director of Central Intelligence approved commencement of the New York Mail Intercept in 1952. In the ensuing years, Postmaster Generals Summerfield, Day, and Blount were informed of the program in varying degrees, as was Attorney General Mitchell. And since 1958, the FBI was aware of this program and received 57,000 items from it. So we're going to stop there. So in the 1950s, from 52 particularly to, I guess, 1957, the CIA began monitoring mail that was going from the U.S. to the Soviet Union. And basically, a lot of that mail was opened. Some of it was printed, some of it was photographed, and some of it was just plain taken in an attempt to find out who in the U.S. was communicating with Soviet countries and for what reason. Okay, this was a part of the 1950s, 60s era paranoia that capitalist countries and communist countries had with one another. And at some point, the FBI started receiving intercepted mail from the CIA, and apparently 57,000, it's almost 60,000 pieces of mail, or captures of mail, photographs of people's letters and so forth, and prints of this mail were sent directly to the FBI for processing. So apparently some of these pieces of mail were of particular interest to the CIA, and they made the FBI aware of the pieces of mail originating in the U.S. and headed overseas to the Soviet Union were of interest. Okay, these were mail. Now it doesn't say that they were of a particular national security concern as far as like threats or spying activity, but this mail was intercepted based on their contents and oftentimes confiscated by the CIA and forwarded to the FBI. And apparently in 1962 there was a CIA memorandum that indicates the agency was aware that mail openings could be viewed as violating federal criminal laws prohibiting obstruction or delay of mails. Mail tampering is a federal crime. Even if it's the CIA and the FBI that's doing it, you cannot tamper with people's mail. And that was judged by the committee to be a federal violation. And there is a statistic that the CIA put out in the last year before the termination of this program. This mail interception program lasted about 7 years. It says that out of 4.3 million items of mail sent to and from the Soviet Union, the CIA operations in New York examined 2.3 million pieces of mail, photographed 33,000, and opened about 9,000 pieces of mail. The mail intercept was terminated in 1973 when Chief Postal Inspector refused to allow its continuation without an up-to-date high-level approval. So this mail program ran from 1953 to 1973. I'm sorry, I mistakenly said 7 years. It was 20 years. 20 years, okay, 1953 to 1973, that the CIA was opening people's mail. And it observed or documented almost 2.5 million pieces of American mail. So the CIA also ran much smaller mail intercepts for brief periods in San Francisco between 1969 and 1971, and in the territory of Hawaii during 1954 and 55. And for a short period in 1957, mail in transit between foreign countries was intercepted in New Orleans. So, this kind of reminds me of the data interception that we see in clandestine gang stalking. Gang stalkers or target individuals' mail is intercepted with hidden cameras and cell phone cameras and all kinds of cameras. Target individuals' mail is routinely intercepted by third parties that are state sanctioned and are active participants in the disruption. The target individuals see, but it's not just that. TI's text messages, phone calls, emails, and social media posts are also intercepted. Me personally, I don't have a problem being monitored. I don't have a problem being surveilled. It's the nature of the world we live in, but don't use my data as a way to put you in a better position to disrupt me. Why? Because I'm going to find out about it and I'm going to make my findings public for the whole world to see, ladies and gentlemen. So the conclusions are this. While in operation, the CIA's domestic mail opening programs were unlawful. The U.S. statutes specifically forbid opening the mail. It's also unconstitutional. It violates the Fourth Amendment. And it also poses difficulties with the freedom of speech rights of U.S. citizens. Mail cover operations are legal when carried out in compliance with postal regulations. That's observing just the sort of the outer envelope of the mail, not exactly so there are two types of mail cover operations. There's the kind where you just observe the top of the letter, and then there are operations where you open the letter and read the letter. The ones where you open the letter and read the letter, those are unconstitutional. The operations where you just observe the top of the letter, who's it from, who's it going to, those are considered legal under certain circumstances. And while I'm talking, ladies and gentlemen, because like I say, part of the reasons I do these lectures outdoors is because I need to observe my surroundings while I'm outdoors doing these lectures to see who the stalkers send over here, right? I've seen a few people coming and going, right? It was obvious by their interest in me and their movements that they were signaled over here by somebody in a spying capacity. So I'm kind of in sort of a closed off area of the parking garage near the Aventura Mall here in Miami-Dade County. I just had a security officer ride up to me on a bike, swerve around, and go the opposite way. Okay, derive stuff like that. Okay, he didn't say anything to me. He didn't lay a hand on me, right? He didn't cause a ruckus. He didn't verbally interfere with the lecture. This happened about 60 seconds ago. He rode, because I'm in a closed off area on purpose, so as to avoid incoming traffic, outgoing traffic, incoming pedestrians and outgoing pedestrians. He rode his bike all the way around the cars that are blocked off from the area that I'm in with a yellow chain, right? He rode his bike around those cars, went to the end of the garage, circled right out in front of me where I'm seated right now, rode his bike in a 360-degree angle, and then darted back the other way. For no reason other than to make himself known to me, to make his presence known to me. I am not in a spot where this lecture is causing a disruption or a disturbance, and I am not in a spot where any cars could come or go. But he somehow found a way to navigate his bicycle into this little area that I'm in, crowd my space with the bicycle, and then dart back the other way without a word. Okay, that's the kind of garbage gang stalkers do. It's not always about physically harming you, verbally harming you, okay, or spreading some kind of a germ to you through the air. Those are the core and central tenets of being a clandestine, state-sanctioned, okay, intelligence and U.S. Army-led gang stalker. Okay, that's what they do. But part of what they do also is simply what I call synchronized space crowding, or just sort of getting in your way somehow. That's what the security guard did. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, security guards, a lot of them, particularly here in South Florida, are very deeply entrenched into the signaling mechanisms that gang stalkers use. And especially if you come to Aventura, you're going to see that with the security guards, especially the ones in the mall. I mean, these guys, they're not terribly good at covert signaling mechanisms. The signaling mechanisms that these guys use are easy to see, particularly for a seasoned targeted individual. Okay, and when you see these mechanisms, it's not difficult to document them. They're happening right in front of you, and they're happening a lot of times using multiple parties. Now, somebody signaled that security guard to come over here and do that. Okay, there is nothing against company policy or against mall policy for me sitting here and doing what I'm doing. Nothing at all. That security guard did that just so I would see him, just so he could crowd my space really quickly and dart off on his bike. Okay, those types of maneuvers are indicative of gang stalking, and they don't just do them on bikes, they do them on cars too. Look at some of my videos on YouTube about synchronized vehicular obstruction of movement and some of the cowardice and straight up clandestine and hostile garbage that a lot of these useful idiot gang stalkers do. It gives them some kind of an ego boost. And I've stopped the lecture. We're going to go to conclusions here in a second. But it's obvious to me, ladies and gentlemen, that stalkers get an ego boost when they get to use some sort of a signaling mechanism to flag down targets and sort of direct other stalkers to that target's location to pester him somehow. Okay, there's some sort of an ego boost that's generated from that with these stalkers. And quite frankly, it's pathetic. And this is something that you'll notice in a number of my lectures where I'm outside, and mind you, that's part of the reason I do this outside, is so that I can observe how stalkers react to my presence wherever I am. And this being a state-sanctioned mechanism, that's sort of a violation of my freedom of speech rights. I'm sitting here conducting an open-air lecture, having consulted my freedom of speech under the U.S. Constitution, and you send some knucklehead over here to crowd my space and interrupt the thing. Okay, what kind of thug, what kind of coward feels the need to signal somebody to the location of somebody who's exercising his First Amendment rights with the intention of pestering him while he does it? Okay, imagine trying to earn a degree under those types of conditions. Imagine trying to carry on a career under those kinds of conditions. Imagine attempting to carry on entrepreneurial activities under such conditions. You see, now, a target individual experiences stuff like that at work, at school, at church. Okay, it's hard to carry on in any kind of official duty when you constantly have third parties, many of which are also members of the institution, using these mechanisms to disrupt you, to annoy you, to pester you, and to sabotage you. Okay, now, efforts to sabotage this lecture have failed. The useful idiots have lost. And what you all do is garbage, and I'm glad that there are people online exposing it. So we're going to continue on. We're going to look at conclusions. While in operation, the CIA's domestic mail opening programs were unlawful. United States statutes specifically forbid opening the mail. The mail openings also raise constitutional questions under the Fourth Amendment. Guarantees against unreasonable search in the scope of the New York Project poses possible difficulties with the First Amendment rights of speech and press. And we read that part already. The New York mail intercept did not meet these criteria. The nature and degree of assistance given by the CIA to the FBI and the New York Mail Project indicate that the CIA's primary purpose eventually became participation with the FBI and internal security functions. Accordingly, the CIA's participation was prohibited under the National Security Act. So, in effect, the way the CIA carried out its mail operation, it was unconstitutional. And we're going to look at the recommendation also. And we're going to look at that in a second, but I want to say another word about what I just experienced. Mind you, in a number of my lectures you can go back and listen to, I'll be sitting outside talking. It'll be an empty space. I typically find empty spaces or spaces where there are not that many people around to do my lectures, because the less stalkers that are present while I do my lectures, the less of a chance that my lecture will be disrupted. So I typically try to find fairly remote, fairly secluded areas to do my lectures, and that's why I chose this closed off section of this underground, or not this underground, but this it's sort of an enclave that is attached to a parking garage. But still they managed to disrupt my space. They still managed to do that. And they did it using signaling mechanisms as well. For the ego boost, they feel better about themselves as people now that they were able to use a signaling mechanism to disrupt a person. So, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I enjoy doing these lectures. I enjoy exposing this corrupted, diseased American system that we call its national security and armed services divisions, because they're not just looking at protecting the homeland. It's not just about that, and it's not just about identifying foreign threats either. Some of it is about social engineering, experimentation on people, disruption and sabotage on American citizens in opposition to the Constitution and the concept of inalienable rights. That's apparently one of the perks of these kinds of jobs. You go into the CIA, you go into the U.S. Army, you go into covert operations divisions of these entities, and you get to do open air disruption campaigns against U.S. citizens and walk away and go back to your families and live your life out as a person that draws a taxpayer check. But I want to say another word about the Aventura Mall security guards. I've actually filed a number of complaints against these guys. They do some really intrusive, disgusting, annoying, and pestering things here. The Aventura Mall security guards, there was one instance where one of them had a chain in the food court. It was a steel chain, and this chain was probably about 4 feet long, and it had a thick lock on the end of it. And this knucklehead was walking back and forth in the food court in full security gear, swinging the chain around, irrespective to anyone who was in the food court. I took a picture of that idiot and forwarded it to the corporate office here, and they actually got back to me and said that they apologized, and they said that they would talk to that particular security officer about doing stuff like that in the presence of patrons. Okay, the security guards here are some of the most knuckleheaded security guards I've ever seen anywhere. in any mall I've ever been to in life. And I've been to malls in many different states. And security guards in malls typically patrol the mall. They look at people and they observe scenarios and situations and act according to policy. Here in Aventura, these Aventura mall security guards, these guys act like a thug unit. And they obviously do signaling mechanisms and things like that. And these guys conduct themselves like total thugs here. I mean, we ain't just talking about crowding people's space and swinging gigantic steel chains around in the food court. You know, these guys dart downstairs in front of people, nearly knocking people downstairs. I've seen security guards at this mall, Aventura Mall in Aventura, Florida. I've seen them dart down escalators and dart up escalators, not to respond to an emergency, but just because doing ignorant stuff like that makes their jobs, I guess, more adventurous and more digestible to them. Okay, nearly knocking people down escalators, things like that, saying rude, hateful, and obnoxious things to people, flinging germs through the air at people, going into the food court using bodily functions around people that are eating. Just real knuckleheaded stuff. And a number of the complaints that I filed against the security officers here to the corporate office here have been returned. They've contacted me back apologizing for their behavior. But I mean, apparently sometimes you just have to drain the swamp, as President Trump used to say about the people that were in Washington. Sometimes you just can't rehabilitate or teach or coach an employee to do their job in a way that's civil. Sometimes you just have to get new people who will respond to the training in a way that is cohesive to the goals of the mall and its investors. But anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, the recommendations for the CIA's domestic mail operation are as follows. We're getting back into this. The president should instruct the Director of Central Intelligence that the CIA is not to engage again in domestic mail openings, except with the express statutory authority in times of war. The president should instruct the Director of Central Intelligence that mail cover examinations are to be in compliance with postal regulations. They are to be undertaken only in furtherance of the CIA's legitimate activities, and then only on a limited and selected basis, clearly involving matters of national security. So they put clamps on the CIA. All right, the findings of this presidential level executive committee on CIA activities is this. The CIA violated the Constitution and applicable federal laws by opening the mail of U.S. citizens and reading it, copying it, photographing it. That's unconstitutional. If the CIA wants to look at the cover of the mail, for example, just the envelope, the front of the envelope, that must be done within the confines of federal laws and guidelines. The CIA violated both and was totally irresponsible in how it carried out mail tampering. So what we're going to do is move on to the next document. This is going to be Project Mockingbird. And this document here is about 50 pages long. We're not going to read all 50 pages. We're going to look at the main talking points. Project Mockingbird was a Central Intelligence Agency operation in which news journalists' phones were tapped by the CIA and their mail was opened. Their telegrams were intercepted. It was a real bad situation. This declassified document is a memorandum for Mr. David W. Berlin, Commission on CIA's activities within the U.S., and it is dated 12th of February 1975, and it is a CIA-generated document. The author of it is not published, but this document was made public through the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library, and the identification is Project Mockingbird, a telephone tap in 1963 of the homes and offices of syndicated news columnists whose columns appear in a redacted newspaper. So the Office of Security in the CIA had responsibility for the operation. It was basically the CIA snooping in on the phone calls of syndicated news journalists. I mean, the CIA apparently had an interest in a number of news journalists whose names have been redacted because of some of the things that they were writing in the news, with respect to their duties as news reporters. And the operation, which began in March 1962 and was continued and was discontinued in June 1962, they just basically tapped the phones of and the shared offices of newsmen. Their offices were bugged, their phones were tapped, and everything they said publicly and privately while at work was heard by CIA operatives. We're going to scroll down. Anyhow, this matter here, this I'm sorry, let me scroll down a little bit more. All right, so the CIA was essentially looking for sources of classified information to these newsmen. So these newsmen, whose names were redacted, were receiving classified information from somewhere. And it was possible that the news company, the news agency that these newsmen worked for, was paying federal operatives for access to classified information. And the CIA wanted to know who was giving these news journalists classified documents that were being kept by the federal government. Apparently these guys were just getting information from government operatives that they weren't entitled to. Classified documents, and they were making news stories off of them. And Project Mockingbird basically was it was seen as productive in finding out who these news journalists' sources were and how these sources were getting access to classified government documents and selling them to these news journalists. You see, so these news journalists were in receipt of government classified documents that, quite frankly, they had no business receiving. And the CIA wanted to know who these sources were that were giving these journalists these classified pieces of information. And Project Mockingbird assisted them in that. Now, let me see. And these sources of information were apparently cooperative to the aims and the investigative objectives of these news journalists. So it was national defense information that was being furnished to them. It was possible in many cases to establish a specific identity of the source. In other instances, it was possible to establish only a general non-specific identification of a source, such as my friend's over in the Navy, or he works right in their office, that type of thing. because of the frequent compromise of sources, either by name or essential elements, which could lead to the identification of an individual. It became apparent that over an extended period of time, most, if not all, such sources could be identified. And sources of information of all sorts used by news journalists and news journalists 1 and 2 can be generalized as follows: the Speaker of the House, members of the Senate and House of Representatives, congressional staff members, members of the news media, employees and staff members of the White House, the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the Agencies for International Development, the Department of Justice, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the CIA, staff members of the Office of the Vice President, the Republican and Democratic National Committee, lobbyists, federal retired officers and officials, miscellaneous others, ranging from a union official to a priest. There appeared to be a fairly clear division of source types between individual 1 and individual 2. The news journalists that were getting this classified information were not named. Their names were redacted. Journalist 1 appeared to have most of his contacts among former Army associates. Individual 2, by far the most active, had the remaining contacts. These news journalists had contacts ranging from the Speaker of the House of the United States to staff members of the White House to RNC committee members, DNC committee members, lobbyists, retired federal officers, and miscellaneous other people. These news journalists had a lot of contacts that they used to get information. And a number of these contacts were giving them classified information, which is a violation of federal laws. So essentially, Mockingbird was seen as a success because the CIA was able to find out just who was giving these journalists their classified information concerning the goings-on in the U.S. government. All right, so the next document we're going to read is we're going to read something about we're going to read about a matter that was of particular importance to Dick Cheney, who at the time was the chief of staff, and the chief of staff of the United States he basically acts as the chief advisor to the president. And Dick Cheney was the chief of staff, and he came across the scenario that is known to people as the Frank Olson situation. Mr. Cheney sent a memorandum to Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time. This letter has a White House letterhead on it, and it is dated 11th of July, 1975. The Chief of Staff, Dick Cheney, had a problem with something that he read about a U.S. Army biologist named Frank Olson being murdered by a CIA doctor by the name of Sidney Gottlieb as a part of MK Ultra, which was a CIA and U.S. Army co-op that sought to use chemicals and bacteria on U.S. citizens simply to see what the effect would be in case they had to use such weapons on the Soviets later. So it basically used U.S. citizens as test subjects for chemicals and diseases that were being developed by the CIA and the U.S. Army for chemical and biological warfare weapons, which were used as practice runs on the U.S. on the American people. Okay, such a thing happening in this country, in my estimation, is an indicator that the national security, intelligence, and armed forces of this country are corrupted badly. And the very DNA of these auxiliaries is corrupt. And they're not only capable of doing it again, but they're capable of doing it to more U.S. citizens in the future. It's just an ongoing programmatic model that the national security, the national intelligence, and the U.S. armed forces in this country have. They have the capacity and the resources to conduct experiments on people, some of which are biologically hazardous, some of which are chemically hazardous, some of which are physiologically hazardous, some of which are occupationally hazardous, some of which are socially hazardous, and some of which are fatal. But instead of finding responsible ways to carry out these tests and these experiments, they do them in the most hostile, subversive, silly, thuggish, and knuckleheaded way possible. And that's what we see here, ladies and gentlemen, with the situation with Frank Olson. So this letter is from Dick Cheney, the Chief of Staff of the United States, or the advisor to the President, to Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense. We are going to... All right, so here's the start of it. We're going to skip the front page. It's basically just a description of the letter. And we're going to look at the contents of the letter itself. Again, this is from Chief of Staff Richard Dick Cheney to the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. It begins as an answer to a question or an opening statement. The recent disclosure of the facts concerning the death of Dr. Frank Olson are of great concern to me. This is Chief of Staff Cheney talking here. I am equally distressed by the fact that the full details of Dr. Olson's death were not made known to Mrs. Olson and other members of his family. Mrs. Olson and her family deserve our deepest sympathy. I hope to meet with the family at the earliest opportunity to personally extend an apology on behalf of the United States government. And he's quoting from the Rockefeller report on page 226. In the late 1940s, the CIA began to study the properties of certain behavior influencing drugs such as LSD and how such drugs might be put to intelligence use. The interest was prompted by reports that the Soviet Union was experimenting with such drugs, and by speculation that the confessions introduced during trials in the Soviet Union and other Soviet bloc countries during the late 1940s might have been elicited by the use of drugs or hypnosis. Great concern over Soviet and North Korean techniques in brainwashing continued to manifest into the early 1950s. That's just an overview, okay? The United States in the 1940s started experimenting with certain behavior influencing drugs such as LSD to see if they had any value to them of an intelligence nature, particularly with respect to the Soviets' uses of LSD in its intelligence programs. Apparently the Soviets experimented with LSD as a truth serum and as an interrogation enhancer. And when the United States found out that the Soviets were using LSD as a interrogation enhancer and as a possible truth serum, the CIA, having learned that about the Soviets, decided we're going to do that here too. Okay, we're going to acquire LSD and we're going to use it on our citizens here, so as to find out ourselves how we could use LSD in the questioning of covert operatives or spies or persons that may be considered deleterious to American national sovereignty. So what was the CIA's response to that? They started testing LSD on everybody. Okay, they didn't do them in controlled experiments. They sent operatives, plainclothes CIA operatives, under the Project MKUltra banner, out into the world, out into the streets, out into the public, and basically just started spiking people's food and drink with LSD. And the CIA was doing that for decades, for up to 20 years. CIA operatives were going out into the open, out into public, and spiking people's food and drinks with LSD just to get them hallucinating. And then they'd sit back somewhere with binoculars as the person stumbled off and took notes on how the LSD affected that person. These were not controlled experiments. They were not professional experiments. They were not experiments of a effective or efficient nature. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of this country, mass-produced LSD in labs through its Technical Services Division and probably through the U.S. Army Chemical Corps, took LSD, spiked people's food and drink with it anywhere. These experiments could take place anywhere. Restaurants, coffee houses, pizza parlors, okay, corporate functions, anywhere where there was food or drink and a CIA operative could get access to it, they would go, probably a number of CIA operatives, in plain clothes, to these functions with a pocket full of LSD, and they'd observe the people there eating and drinking and socializing, and they would sneak LSD into people's food or drink and walk off, and then sit back and document the effect that the LSD had on the person. So rather than do controlled experiments, professional experiments, effective or efficient experiments, the CIA was just spiking people's food and drink anywhere, everywhere with LSD, sometimes to the immediate detriment of those people. And the CIA apparently thought that that was a good idea in finding out whether or not the drug had any value to the intelligence community of the United States. And Frank Olson was a prime example of those follies, those national intelligence, national security, and U.S. Army follies. And the Rockefeller Commission investigated the death of Dr. Frank Olson. And we're going to look into that. So Dr. Frank A. Olson, this is part of the Rockefeller report. Dr. Frank A. Olson was a biochemist and a civilian employee of the Army working at Fort Detrick in a cooperative effort with the CIA. On November 19, 1953, at one of the periodic meetings of Fort Detrick and CIA personnel, a dosage of LSD was placed by CIA personnel in drinks consumed by Dr. Olson and others who were members of the group. Prior to receiving the LSD, Dr. Olson had participated in discussions where the testing of such substances on unsuspecting subjects was agreed to in principle. However, neither Dr. Olson nor any of the others was made aware that they had been given LSD until about 20 minutes after the fact. During the next several days, Dr. Olson developed side effects, as a result of which he was taken to New York City on November 24, 1953, to be treated by a doctor who was a consultant to the agency on drug-related matters, Dr. Gerald A. Abramson. On November 24th, 25th, and 26th, he met with Dr. Abramson. After seeing him on the 27th, Dr. Abramson believed that hospitalization would be in Dr. Olson's best interest. Arrangements were made for a hospital room near Dr. Olson's home in the Washington area, but his room could not be prepared until the following day. Consequently, Dr. Lashbrook of the CIA and Dr. Olson stayed in the Hotel Statler in New York on the night of November 27th. Dr. Lashbrook reported that during cocktails and dinner, Dr. Olson appeared cheerful and spoke freely of his forthcoming hospitalization. Lashbrook and Olson retired about 11 p.m. They occupied separate twin beds in the same room on the 10th floor. At approximately 2:30 Saturday morning, Lashbrook was awakened by a loud noise. He reported that Olson had crashed through the closed window blind and closed window and had fallen to his death. So we're going to stop there before we get into the aftermath of this. So here's what happened. There was an army gathering of there was a gathering of Army science researchers in Fort Detrick, Maryland, in a secluded cabin, and Dr. Frank Olson was one of the researchers that were present at this convention. And basically these biomedical researchers who were affiliated with the Army exchanged ideas on research. And ironically, Dr. Olson, or the guy that was killed during this experiment, he expressed just weeks before his demise that he was actually okay with the prospect of people being given these hallucinogenic substances by CIA operatives without their knowledge. So I'm going to say that again for emphasis. Dr. Olson, who was killed by another CIA doctor, okay, who put LSD in his liquor while he wasn't looking, that same doctor, Dr. Olson, just weeks before his death, affirmed that he was not an objection to that being done to other people. Dr. Frank Olson wasn't exactly a saint here. Okay, he was very much somebody whose life was taken from him in a very stupid experiment, a very dumb government experiment. But he himself said that he thought it was okay for the government to spike people's food and drink with drugs while they weren't looking for data collection purposes. And it's kind of ironic that the same thing was done to him and it took his very life. So Dr. Olson was seen by a psychiatrist after he was given the LSD without his knowledge. Okay, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was the chief doctor in the CIA's MK Ultra program. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb put 70 micrograms of LSD in Dr. Olson's liquor when Dr. Olson wasn't looking. And as a result of that, Dr. Olson came down with symptoms that were consistent with psychosis or dementia. And ultimately, that doctor, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, he just went on about his business. He just went on about his life. Okay, he was never charged with a crime for doing that to Dr. Olson. And he testified years later about it under condition of immunity, okay? But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb spiked Dr. Olson's liquor bottle with 70 micrograms of LSD, and it caused Dr. Olson to have conniption fits, delirium. He had a psychotic episode. And eventually, Dr. Olson saw a psychiatrist who recommended him to another psychiatrist in New York. But in the meantime, before that psychiatrist became available, Dr. Olson and another doctor, Dr. Lashbrook, stayed in the Statler Hotel in New York, awaiting treatment options. And apparently up to this point, Dr. Olson's mental health and his mental state began to rapidly corrode and deteriorate. And while he was in the Statler Hotel with Dr. Lashbrook, who was there for support, while they were in the Statler Hotel awaiting for their treatment options for Dr. Olson, Dr. Olson went into a psychotic episode and jumped out of a 10th-story window and killed himself. It's hard to know if it was an accident or if Dr. Olson willingly took his own life because of the psychotic episodes that the LSD kept giving him over the past week. But regardless, the CIA was liable. And there were a bunch of lawsuits filed. And eventually the family of Dr. Olson was awarded $700,000 for the actions of Sidney Gottlieb's CIA. And apparently, this instance of CIA negligence was a point of contention in these hearings. Okay, the CIA has never made any direct contact with the family. The CIA never told Dr. Olson's wife, "Hey, sorry to tell you this, but the chief CIA doctor put some LSD in your husband's drink while he wasn't looking. Over the next 7 days, your husband, Dr. Olson, got more and more crazy because of the LSD, and eventually your husband jumped out of a 100-foot window because of a psychotic trip he was having." Right, the CIA never did that. The Olson family found out on their own that the CIA was behind the death of Dr. Olson. And the wife and the children of Dr. Olson, years later, wrote the President of the United States a personal grievance against the CIA for spiking their husband and father's liquor bottle with LSD without his knowledge, causing that man to go and jump out of a 10th-story window. About a week later, I mean, this matter got picked up by the news. This matter got picked up by the Senate. It was talked about in congressional hearings, and it was a huge embarrassment for the CIA that this brilliant doctor, Dr. Olson, was killed by another CIA doctor that spiked his drink without telling him. And it was just a matter of concern for Chief of Staff Cheney, and he wanted Mr. Rumsfeld to know about these matters, so they wouldn't be a surprise to him. So what we're going to do is we're going to read Appendix A. This is going to be a summary of charges and findings with respect to the holistic CIA domestic spying, domestic surveillance activities that we saw here in the United States during the stated time periods. I think it's important to read the summary of findings so that the totality of the findings that this Presidential Executive Committee came to after reviewing all of the documents and interviews and witness statements and evidence and all that. What were their conclusions? Okay. So it says here in summary A, it says the initial public charges were that the CIA's domestic activities involved large-scale spying on American citizens in the United States by the CIA, whose responsibility is foreign intelligence and keeping dossiers on large numbers of American citizens, aiming those activities at Americans who have expressed their disagreement with various government policies. These initial charges were subsequently supplemented by others, including allegations that the CIA had intercepted and opened personal mail in the United States for 20 years, had infiltrated domestic dissident groups and otherwise intervened in domestic politics, had engaged in illegal wiretaps and break-ins, and had improperly assisted other government agencies. In addition, assertions have been made ostensibly linking the CIA to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And it becomes clear from the public reaction to these charges that the secrecy in which the agency necessarily operates, combined with the allegations of wrongdoing, had contributed to widespread public misunderstanding of the agency's actual practices. A detailed analysis has convinced the Commission that a great majority of the CIA's domestic activities comply with its statutory authority. Nevertheless, over the 28 years of its history, the CIA has engaged in some activities It should be criticized and not permitted to happen again, both in the light of the limits imposed on the agency by law and as a matter of public policy. Some of these activities were initiated or ordered by presidents, either directly or indirectly. Some of them fall within doubtful areas between responsibilities delegated to the CIA by Congress and the National Security Council on the one hand, and activities specifically prohibited to the agency on the other. Some of them were plainly unlawful and constituted improper invasions on the rights of Americans. The agency's own recent actions, undertaken for the most part in 1973 and 74, have gone so far as to terminate the activities upon which this investigation is focused. The recommendations of this of the commission are designed to clarify areas of doubt concerning the agency's authority, to strengthen the agency's structure, and to guard against recurrences of these improprieties. So, to summarize this, okay, the CIA's activities in the United States had come under scrutiny by this committee because of the allegations concerning a number of things. Illegal spying on U.S. citizens, okay, including the interception of mail and wiretaps on their phones. Break-ins, orchestrated break-ins by the CIA to people's homes and offices. Also, there were allegations of the infiltration of domestic political dissident groups, and had improperly assisted other government agencies. The CIA was guilty of all of those things. Ladies and gentlemen, it was not guilty of participating in the death of JFK. Okay, it was not guilty of that. And the findings of the committee was that aside from these misgivings, okay, these covert operations where it violated people's constitutional rights, aside from these misgivings, the CIA was found to have participated or to have operated in a satisfactory capacity as a government auxiliary. Okay, so for the 28 years of its existence, okay, this committee found that the CIA typically performed its duties within the confines of the law, but there were infractions of a constitutional nature that were made by the CIA with respect to its misusing its resources to illegally spy on United States citizens, and not just citizens, but company men, journalists, okay, student activist groups. Okay, the CIA did illegally spy on them, particularly through the infiltration of those groups without just cause, the tapping of phones without just cause, the interception of mail without just cause, and typically misuses of its ability to surveil American citizens. That was all abused, and it violated the Fourth Amendment right. The Fourth Amendment constitutional right to unlawful searches and seizures by the government. Okay, that was the big one. Okay, the CIA was found to be in violation of the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution with its spying activities. I think that's the kicker. All right, so you just have to know, ladies and gentlemen, that when it comes to surveillance activities, domestic activities, these covert operations, sometimes they're difficult to sniff out, and sometimes it's difficult to know about them until the operation's over, and the business of the operation has been made public by the news media or by the Supreme Court or by the President's office or by Congress. Okay, typically those are the only ways that such programs get exposed, but with respect to clandestine gang stalking, ladies and gentlemen, I am your president, I am your Supreme Court, I am your news media, I am your Congress, because I'm the one coming forward with this information in an unfiltered capacity. So that these types of things will be more difficult to perpetrate in the future. Yeah, I want to see the eradication of gang stalking. It's worse than MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, Operation Hoodwink, Operation Chaos. It's worse than the Zersetsa, okay, because it has those programs to learn from. You see, all of those programs have been duly documented and exposed through congressional hearings, through Senate hearings, through the news media. Okay, Supreme Court rulings have been made on it. Dossiers from the office of the president have been made on it. Those programs have been thoroughly documented. But when it comes to clandestine gang stalking, there has been no such hearing, no such dossier, no materials whatsoever have been released on the merits of this particular program. I oftentimes speak on the various programs that I think it mirrors. I oftentimes speak on the various programs that I think it mimics. I oftentimes speak on the merits of how those programs turned out, the embarrassment they caused the American people, and the embarrassment that it caused the U.S. federal establishment. That's the same thing that's going to happen in gang stalking, ladies and gentlemen, at every turn. It appears our national security, intelligence, and armed forces continually use programs of a covert nature that are found later to be unconstitutional. And I don't like that. I think that's a bad look. It goes to show that in the very DNA of our national security apparatus and U.S. Armed Forces apparatus, there is a strand of that DNA, and I'm talking about the DNA of their operational makeup, their operational structure, okay? The DNA of everything that constitutes their abilities to carry out their duties. There's something in that DNA, and I'm using DNA metaphorically here, that seems to compel them to decide who in this country is fit to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, who in this country is fit to enjoy their inalienable rights, and then who in this country is not fit to enjoy inalienable rights, who in this country is going to be our next test subject. You know, it's a bad look. And I hate to see a country like the United States, which has a fascinating enough history, to allow itself to stoop to those levels using its federal auxiliaries. I mean, it just boggles the mind, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen, to this lecture. I'm going to leave it there, and I will see you next time.